Think about the single biggest challenge that you're dealing with in your life right now. What steps are you taking in order to solve it? What sacrifices are you willing to make? Let us gain some inspiration from the protagonist of today's video, which is based on the book Longitude, the true story of a lone genius who solved the greatest scientific problem of his time. So what was this incredible scientific problem? What made it such a big deal? And who is the star of our story? So I was out walking the other day and I came across a sight that was so breathtaking that it made me stop short in my tracks. It was the sight of the moon and Venus, perfectly aligned and placed between the forked branches of a tree. And I thought to myself, this must have been the same planet and moon that Galileo Galilei, the 17th century astronomer, had looked at in order to try and solve one of the greatest, most perplexing scientific problems of his time. And so did Sir Isaac Newton. He too tried to solve the exact same problem using the tools of astronomy. What is interesting about this approach is that neither of these great minds were able to figure out a solution. What is even more interesting? The list of great minds who made similar attempts did not end there. That includes the likes of Robert Hooke, who gave us Hooke's law, among a variety of other things, Christian Huygens, of the wave theory of light fame. There is also Edmund Halley, who gave us Halley's comet, and the great 18th century mathematician Leonhard Euler. They all contributed to the problem, but in vain. But ultimately, someone came along and managed to solve it. So what was this incredible scientific problem? What made it such a big deal? And who is the star of our story? This is what this video is all about. So this is called the longitude problem. And as evident from the name, this has to do with figuring out the longitude during overseas navigation. Now longitude, as is latitude, is a part of the global coordinate system. In particular, longitude refers to these vertical lines such that we can place ourselves to the west or east of the meridian line. Now, latitude is easier to find. This is because latitude is fixed by the laws of nature, while the 0-degree meridian of longitude shifts like the sands of time. This difference makes finding latitude child's play from the sun, stars, or the moon, but it turns the determination of longitude, especially at sea, into an adult dilemma, one that stumped the wisest minds of the world for the better part of human history. This was such a tremendous problem that in 1714 the British government came up with something called the Longitude Act, which promised a monetary sum of £20,000 to anybody who could solve the problem by figuring out the longitude to a certain degree of accuracy as stipulated in the Longitude Act and present that convincingly before the board of directors. £20,000, by the way, by today's standards, is $1 million. But this just goes on to show the remarkable impact of this one scientific problem on economy, society, and definitely the efforts of scientists all over the world. Well, any economy that could figure out the longitude problem could effectively map the sea. One of their greatest incentives was trying to figure out secret navigational passageways that could keep their ships and their loot from various colonies safe from run-ins with pirates and enemy ships. This then obviously gave them a better, stronger hold of the colonies themselves. So, in a sense, figuring out the longitude means they had control over land and sea, so they could effectively control the world. So for a very long time, some of the greatest minds, as mentioned in the beginning of this video, and that was in no way an exhaustive list, they wanted to solve the problem by looking at stars, charting eclipses and planetary motions, that then got converted into elaborate, detailed tables to be used by sailors at sea. The problem is this technique was not very precise or reliable. John Harrison was an English clockmaker, a man of simple birth and high intelligence. Harrison, meanwhile, was a one-man army until he was later joined by his son. He had no education or official training of any kind, and yet he walked in there and solved the problem by wresting the answer away from the heavens and locking it in a pocket watch. Well, how did he do it? So the problem is that clocks were inherently unstable. They would speed up or slow down when at sea in response to changes in temperature and also the motion of the ship itself, all of which are unavoidable. These are not constraints that one can simply eliminate. So what was needed was a high precision chronometer or a timepiece, and this is exactly what Harrison delivered after decades of giving up his life working on the same problem single-mindedly and meticulously. And so at this point, let me present to you the H4. This is Harrison's brainchild and one of the most spectacular feats of engineering. What you're looking at right here is a high precision chronometer which determined longitude at the time to a degree of accuracy that was unheard of. Look at how intricate and sophisticated and exquisite this is. When I first saw it, I could hardly believe my eyes. Harrison kept refining his work obsessively and barely cared to claim the prize until it satisfied his admirably high standards. His invention spanned across roughly 40 years, from the H1 to H4, each a better and more polished version of the last. He was truly a master of creative and unconventional solutions. For example, revisiting the problem of unstable clocks at sea, Harrison's solution was to use something called the gridiron.
An ordinary long case clock in the early 1700s has a metal rod pendulum which loses its accuracy as the ambient temperature changes. Harrison wanted to design a pendulum that could compensate for changes in temperature and still keep accurate time. He discovered that brass expands around twice the rate of steel, and so using this logic, a rod made out of brass would increase an equal distance to a rod twice the size of that made of steel. By connecting these two rods at a critical point, the expansion could be opposed and the lengthening compensated, the one by the other. Harrison designed the gridiron system that linked the rods of brass and steel folded in a series that allowed the effective length of the pendulum to remain constant and oscillate evenly despite changes in temperature.
Harrison proposed a solution to this problem which was absolutely beautiful, and it is testament to his deep understanding of material sciences, physics, and engineering. Indeed, some modern horologists claim that Harrison's work facilitated England's mastery over the oceans and thereby led to the creation of the British Empire. So the problem is solved. The government has what it wanted, and so technically Harrison should get the £20,000 as promised, right? Wrong. That is far from what happened. And in fact, this is where the story becomes kind of sad, although it did end on a good note, so there is that. But Harrison had to essentially struggle for most of his life in order to try and get this prize, which he very well deserved. It wasn't until he was 80 years old, and only after King George III personally intervened, that Parliament finally awarded him the remaining sum. Even then, it was given as a special grant rather than official prize money. In a sense, he had to struggle not just with the technical challenges of creating a precision timekeeper at sea, but also with the challenges of complicated bureaucracy and, even more than that, jealous astronomers who simply could not digest the fact that there could be someone else better than them. An aged, exhausted Harrison, taken under the wing of King George III, ultimately claimed his rightful monetary reward in 1773. After 40 struggling years of political intrigue, international warfare, academic backbiting, scientific revolution, and economic upheaval. All these threads and more entwine in the lines of longitude. To unravel them now, in an age when a network of orbiting satellites can nail down a ship's position within a few feet in just a moment or two, is to see the globe anew. Alright, final thoughts. Was he a lone genius? In a sense, yes, certainly. But also, we cannot ignore the colossal amount of time and effort that he put into his work, which took up most of his life. And so I suppose when we're dealing with our own longitude problem or problems, right, this could be one of the takeaways of the book, is that Life is not fair. The rewards that we get for our efforts are not always directly proportional to the effort that we put in. And that is okay. It is okay to be mindful and cognizant of this fact and accepting of it. We all have our journeys, we all have our challenges, and we need to have faith and perseverance as we keep pushing. It is also really helpful to have such stories in our peripheral vision. This video has come across as a suggestion from Professor Dr. Janusz Radzki, who is the Vice President of Engineering at Siemens. I had the absolute honor of sharing a table and a memorable conversation with him at a scientific conference last year. Thanks to him and the writers Sobel and Andrews for giving us all this rich and decadent taste of scientific history and a beautifully raw insight into what a life of dedication looks like. And with that, thank you for watching. I will see you around next time.